Everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're calling in from. My name is Amber Khan, and I am a disaster researcher at the University of Washington in Seattle in the US. And thank you for joining us today for this webinar today titled Our Land, Our Survival, Communities Mobilizing Against Land Grabbing and Dispossession. This is hosted by the International Center for Community Land Trusts. And this webinar comes at a very timely point. Across the world, communities are facing accelerating disasters, heightened militarization, tech extraction through the promise of artificial intelligence, green capitalism, and land grabs. And this moment really calls for thinking creatively, hearing successes in the movement for land justice, and connecting with organizers, researchers, advocates, and community members across the world who are resisting against the current status quo. So today we'll have Spanish interpretation, as well as translation to over 60 languages through a Zoom add-on called Worldly. And then if you have any questions today during the panel, you can use the question and answer, the Q&A function. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today from Canada, Belgium, Barbuda, and Puerto Rico. Leilani Farha will start the webinar off for us today. And Leilani is the Global Director of The Shift, an international movement to secure the right to housing. She served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing from 2014 to 2020. And as a lawyer and global advocate, her work focuses on housing as a human right and confronting the financialization of housing and land. Leilani, I'll pass it to you for your introduction.
Thanks so much, Amber, and thank you for inviting me into what I think may be one of the most important conversations that we should be having right now. And what I'm going to do with my few minutes is just to sort of set the stage in a really zoomed out way, just to talk about where we're at globally with respect to land. And I mean, it will come as no surprise to you that I might begin with the idea of empire. And I'm not sure we ever left the age of empire, to be honest. I live in a country, Canada, that is a colonial nation based in land theft and the dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their homes and lands. And that has continued to the present and continues to the present. What I think we're witnessing right now is an unabashed, a very bald colonial moment, maybe like one we haven't seen for some time. And the starkness of it, the brazenness of it is shocking, at least to me. And I thought I would just take you through some examples. You all know them, but let's visit a few places around the world. We can look at Palestine and Gaza at the top. Without getting into the history of Israel's colonization and takeover with the support of the United States and other Western nations of the entire Palestinian territories, if we just look at Gaza post October 7, 2023, we see that Israel is now controlling 64% of the lands there, and they have a variety of mechanisms to do so. If we look at Greenland, and the threats the United States has made to take over Greenland, we'll see again a colonial grabbing. If we look at Venezuela and Iran, again, imperialist takeovers of land in both of those places through aggression. And so the question is, like, what's this all about? And we know very clearly in each of those places, Gaza, Greenland, Venezuela, Iran, what's on offer to colonialists and empire are natural resources in particular. And I mean, Gaza, off the coast of Gaza, there's natural gas. Greenland has special minerals. Venezuela and Iran are big oil producing nations. And on top of that, many of these places are strategically located with ports that allow for trade routes. And so empire is going after both the resources, the land, and the strategic position so that they can control supply chains. And so it's a very scary and stark moment. If you look at where all those places are situated geographically, we end up kind of with the world. And I have only mentioned some of the places under siege, of course. And so, what interests me, my work, and what kind of animates me is, who is behind this? And we're so often pointing our fingers at governments, and we should. The United States, the United Kingdom, many parts of Western Europe, and Israel, and that ecosystem of nations. But the ecosystem is broader than that. We all know. So and almost now inseparable. So the actors, we have governments we've identified. We have investors, financial firms, banks, and real estate capital. And they all operate in a coordinated system. And why I said that you cannot differentiate, if you look at, for example, the peace board, I'm choking on the words, the peace board established by Donald Trump to oversee the future of Gaza, completely obscene. But who is on that peace board? What you'll see, just dig a little, just Google the names of some of the people. Many of them have deep ties to real estate. Many of them were super active in the global financial crisis in taking over people's homes and making people poorer. And so we have this ecosystem working together. And their modus operandi is to determine basically who counts and who doesn't. And it is Black and brown people the world over, who people in the global South, who do not count, especially where they are perceived as obstacles to land and resources. People living on the land with historic ties to the land, indigenous peoples in particular to the land, are viewed as obstacles to empire, no different than the colonial era. And so when those people are perceived as such, they are stereotyped, discriminated against, denigrated, treated as inferior, and disposable. And there is a culture around that. Make these people seem other and like they don't belong. It's an inversion of the truth. And so then you can get rid of those people with no public complaint and move in and exploit and extract their land and their resources. So it's a bleak place we're in right now, because not just because this is happening, but as I said, because this is happening with impunity. And I mean, I think you all know on the call, I'm the former UN Special Rapporteur, but I'm an international human rights lawyer by training, by profession. I have long been wedded to international human rights law as an accountability mechanism, as a response to extractive industries, as a response to empire, as a way to curtail rights violations. And I have to admit that the system that I have myself been part of, that I believe in terms of the human rights, the right to housing, the right not to be forcibly removed from your home and lands, the right not to be displaced, the right not to be ethnically cleansed, the right of rights of indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent before any decision is taken about their lands. I believe in all of those rights, but the system is not functioning. It is not holding anyone to account within that ecosystem. It is not holding governments to account. It is not holding investors and banks and the private sector to account for human rights. And so it's clear to me, and you'll hear this expression, I think, around these days, that it is up to us, the people. Change always comes from the ground up. We know that. People's movements, people's rights claiming. I have seen this countless times, including in Puerto Rico, for example, where we're gonna hear from Mario in a few moments. So it is up to us, and it's not to say, from my perspective, we should abandon human rights, but rather it's up to us to animate human rights, to show what human rights means, to insist on human rights in our movements and from the ground. And only once we start doing that, we have to start connecting our movements more. And that's why community land trusts are so important, because there is emerging a global movement of community land trusts. We have to start connecting our movements more so that we can actually push back against empire. And the last thing I'll say with my 30 seconds is I think it should be clear why community land trusts and cooperatives and other alternative ways of organizing ownership of land and use of land, why it's so powerful is because it is so disruptive. It is disruptive to the extractive capitalist system we find ourselves in. I actually call it neo-financialized capitalism, or some people will just call it post-capitalism. But these sorts of movements completely disrupt that frame that has been imposed on us, that takes away from us our ability to participate in democracies. And so, even though it is difficult to imagine scaled community land trusts, scaled cooperatives, etc., they are disruptive. And if we can connect these movements, I think that we really will be able to challenge empire. Thank you. And I will end my comments there.
Thanks so much, Leilani. Yeah, thank you for grounding us in this really dystopian moment, if I can use that word, and for this call to action. I especially really resonate with this piece about connection and centering human rights in the community land trust movement and the cooperative movement. But really more broadly, this is about land justice, right? So next, I'll introduce Dr. Lina Algoed. Lina is a researcher and an educator at VUB in Brussels, Belgium. Her work focuses on land governance, climate justice, and community-led resistance to displacement, examining how communal and collective land systems function as tools of protection and self-determination in contexts marked by disaster, speculation, and extractive development. And a fun fact is that Lina, her papers were one of the first ones I read when I was getting interested in this community land trust movement. So she's kind of an academic crush for me in some ways, but also a colleague. Lina, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Amber, for this wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Leilani, as well, for everything you said. I feel completely fired up. I feel angry and very hopeful at the same time. Indeed, as Amber said, the connection is what we need, and this is exactly what we're doing right now. I am going to try to share my slides, see if that works. Is this working? Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. It's really an honor for me to be here and to be surrounded by these incredibly inspiring people. I will today talk briefly about the book that we recently published at Terra Nostra Press, Our Land, Our Survival, which is based on my PhD research that I did in the last, let's say, 10 years or so. The communities at the center of this book, they are here with us today, Barbuda and the Caño Martín Peña Community Land Trust in Puerto Rico. And they are exactly doing what Leilani referred to. They're really fighting against land grabbing. They're coming up with ways, like to resist this land grabbing. And specifically, the land grabbing that we see is happening after climate-related disasters. For centuries, and this is also something Leilani said, communities have been engaged in struggles to defend their land from many people wanting to take it. This is not just something of the past, of course. Land grabbing is happening today in literally every corner of the world, the entire planet. It's affecting an estimated 227 million hectares, but it's probably more. And indeed, land grabbing is about governments, but not only, also multinational corporations, foreign investment firms, buying up very large pieces of land, aiming at expanding land markets, and often further disadvantaging already marginalized communities. And it's happening at such a scale that we can really speak of a global land rush. And it often happens after a disaster strike, as communities are dealing with the aftermaths of these disasters. Recovery processes of the disasters may even be used. They may even facilitate these types of disaster capitalism. And this is something that we describe at length in the book. But communities are resisting. And the book, Our Land, Our Survival, focuses on two communities that are fighting this. They're both in the Caribbean, and they've mobilized their collective land tenure systems to stop land from being taken away. And it's the Caño Martín Peña Community Land Trust in Puerto Rico, represented here today by Mario Núñez Mercado, and the islands of Barbuda, represented here today by Jackie Frank. Here is a map that shows the location of the islands for those who are not familiar with the Caribbean. But first of all, let's take a step back, because we take it so for granted that land is something that can be bought, that land is something that we can own. This idea of private property of land has become so much a part of how our world works. But actually, when we really look at it, more than 50%, more than half of the world's surface is not privately owned. Private property is definitely the dominant way of organizing land, but it's not universal. More than half of the world's lands are collectively owned by about 2.5 billion people. And these people protect crucial biodiversity and thus help the planet from warming up even more. But only about 10% of this land is today officially recognized, and that leaves about 1/3 of the world's population vulnerable to dispossession, to land grabs. So let's take even a bigger step back. Leilani also referred to it, but many scholars are framing climate change as a contemporary manifestation of something that was started, or at least accelerated, about 500 years ago with colonization. And that is the destruction of the earth, the destruction of nature, of land, for the benefit of a very small group of people who benefit financially from it. The Martinican scholar Malcolm Ferdinand called this colonial inhabitation. And that small group of beneficiaries that is benefiting from the destruction of the earth is today as active as it has ever been. And we see that happening around the world, in literally every corner of the planet, as Leilani said, also in Barbuda and Puerto Rico. And this is why I conducted my research that the book is based on, from a theoretical framework of decolonial thought. Decolonial scholars critically examine the influence of colonialism on contemporary practices, such as private property or climate change. I also conducted my research from a feminist perspective, because we see that colonialism, colonization, brought a shift from a more woman-centered or a more feminist view of nature and land, Madre Tierra, Mother Earth, right? Land as reproduction, as necessary for life itself, land as survival, the title of the book, to a much more mechanistic idea of land as mere property, mere resources, something to produce value, to make money of, right? The communities that I worked with have a very different notion of the importance of land. And we see communities standing up to defend these non-mechanistic ideas of relating to the land. I conducted my research using an insurgent participatory action research approach, which is based on insurgent research, a paper by Adam Gaudry. And so insurgent researchers, they are those who are looking for alternatives to the oppressive colonial status quo. We don't hide this objective, and that is liberation from that status quo. And all through my research, my primary responsibility was therefore not with academia, but with the communities that I work with. It's to them that I'm primarily accountable to. Nothing for us without us, as the t-shirt says of one of the South African participants in one of the exchanges that we organized in Puerto Rico with the Caño CLT, and that were part of my action research. So now I'm gonna very briefly introduce the two communities, but Jackie and Mario will talk much more about them later. So first of all, the Caño Martín Peña Community Land Trust. The community land trust in the Caño Martín Peña in Puerto Rico is the result of thousands of residents living in what is called informal settlements surrounding the Martín Peña waterway in downtown San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico. So they were built informally, meaning without legal land ownership when they settled there, when they arrived in the 1930s or 1940s. Today, about 24,000 people still live in the Martín Peña area. The area is urbanized, streets are paved, there is electricity, but the area lacks an adequate sewage system. And that means that wastewater goes directly into the waterway, and that has polluted the waterway so much that it's now blocked, flooding large parts of the streets regularly. And so in the early 2000s, in the area, residents started demanding the restoration of this waterway, the ecological restoration of the mangrove waterway. And residents at that time still did not have formal ownership of the land, but they had lived on it for more than 6 decades. So these residents, after a very long and very deep process of community meetings, decided that they needed to create a mechanism that would allow them to remain in the community while at the same time benefit from the improvements of the infrastructure project. And so what they came up with is groundbreaking in many ways, so groundbreaking that it actually led them to winning the prestigious World Habitat Awards in 2016, which was actually given to them by none other than Leilani Farha in Quito in 2016. So they created a community land trust, but it's different than other community land trusts. So most people, I'm sure, in this webinar, they know what a community land trust is, but so they are instruments that separate home ownership from land ownership. As you can see in this graph, homes are individually owned, but the land is collectively owned by the community. Each family individually holds surface rights to their plots, but the land can never be sold. And this is how the land in these neighborhoods was then collectively regularized. So now it's not informal anymore. That's not the right word to use anymore when we talk about the Martín Peña area. The housing there already existed, and thousands of people already lived there. And that's actually the main difference from many CLTs in Europe or the US. This is what the Caño looked like the day after Hurricane Maria struck in 2017. Many people were affected, many houses were affected. But the hurricane, as we often see, was also an opportunity for the government to get people to leave the many self-built neighborhoods. Because the lands of these communities, of course, had become very strategic, very valuable. The government was trying to use this hurricane to get to these lands. The then governor of Puerto Rico said, it's time to go. Leave the self-built neighborhoods, right? It was really suggested when he said that having such valuable land inhabited by low-income communities is not unlocking the full potential of the land, right? But the Community Land Trust protected residents as they could prove collective ownership of the land. And this is at length described by myself and my co-authors in the book. So then briefly about Barbuda. Barbuda is unique. It had communal land ownership of the entire island since the British abolition of slavery in 1834, so for several centuries. It was ratified in the Barbuda Land Act in 2007. That act states that all land in Barbuda is owned in common by the people of Barbuda, and that land shall not be sold. So unlike most other Caribbean islands, Barbuda's coastline is preserved. This is thanks to the centuries of communal land ownership, right? The small population controls what happens with the land. Residents are very aware of the importance of the beaches, not only because they're beautiful, as you can see on this slide, but also because they act as protection from hurricanes, from storms, from floods, any other events related to climate change. And the same goes for the dunes and the wetlands. But again, the hurricane in 2017 was the opportunity for the Twin States central government and its economic allies to try to privatize the land and invite foreign investors to build luxury real estate, making Barbudans even more vulnerable to withstand severe weather events. And we've termed this process vulnerabilization. Barbudans are, of course, not letting this happen. They're resisting this vulnerabilization, this disaster capitalism. Jackie will talk about it. It happens on an everyday basis. People are there trying to take what's theirs. I want to quickly end this presentation with some of the conclusions that are described in the book, but here I'll just mention a few. How can we see communal land tenure then as climate action, right? So from my interviews with community leaders, residents, staff, these are some of the conclusions that we drew. Communities living with communal land had a stronger community organization at its base. And that community organization allowed community-led disaster preparation. It allowed mutual aid during the disaster and mutual community-led recovery just after. This happened, for example, through collective responses to policies that perpetuate vulnerability, and through legal avenues, for example, to defend community land rights, as well as through the preservation of natural environments. So ultimately, these communities promote a radically different imaginary of land that I think we can all learn from. Land not as profit, but land as necessary for survival of all species in the face of this climate emergency. I'm going to end here, but these stories of resistance of extractivism, not only of resources, but also of landscapes, the extractivism of ways of life, of ways of knowing, right, show that protecting land, nature, biodiversity and confronting climate change are inseparable struggles. The book is dedicated to all the land and environmental defenders, such as the late George Jeffrey in Barbuda. I just want to finish, as I always do, by acknowledging that all these ideas are based on the struggles of the thousands of residents and their allies at the Caño CLT and Barbuda. So please follow them on social media. And thank you so much for your attention. Great. Amber, shall I introduce the speakers? Yeah. Okay. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you two of these land defenders that I mentioned. First of all, there is Jackie Frank. She is a community leader. She's an advocate at the Barbuda Land Rights and Resources Committee. Following the devastation of Hurricane Irma in 2017, she became heavily involved in efforts to protect Barbuda's centuries-old system of collective land ownership from privatization and external development pressures. And then secondly, there is Mario Núñez Mercado, my great friend in Puerto Rico. He's the executive director of the Fideicomiso de la Tierra del Caño Martín Peña and of Corporación del Proyecto Enlace del Caño Martín Peña. He has been deeply involved for decades, Mario, maybe you can tell us how long exactly, in the community's struggle to secure collective land tenure as a foundation for environmental restoration, housing stability, and self-determination. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. I really appreciate it, and I'm really happy to see you again. And as we agreed, I'm going to ask you some questions just to guide our conversation. And my first question is really going to be quite broad because I know I spoke very briefly and very quickly. And also my research is already a little while ago now. So I wanted to know from you if you can share any updates of what is currently happening in Puerto Rico and in Barbuda. Jackie, maybe I can start with you.
Okay, good day, everyone. And thank you, Lena, for this opportunity to share our story in Barbuda. Currently, there is a lot of focus on land. At the end of April, there was a general election in Antigua and Barbuda, and the Prime Minister's party won almost all of the seats. And their focus has always been on how to get the lands of Barbuda away from the Barbudans. So since the election, there have been a lot of pronouncements in the media along the lines of the Barbudans are going to have a land registry and the government are in charge of it. That's not so. The council are not involved because Barbuda is run under a local government system, which is the Barbuda Council. They are quite wide-ranging powers that we have, and those powers are actually embedded in the constitution of Antigua and Barbuda. So the council itself is a very powerful governing body, but the government chooses to ignore that and is focused almost solely on wresting the lands away from Barbudans and encouraging outside investors. Take today for an example. I received a phone call to say that there are Chinese surveyors on the land with a member of the opposition government. This happened last week as well. And I went out this morning and it was the same thing. They're in the same place. And when the Chinese saw us, they walked away. But the person representing the government stayed and talked to us and spoke to us in a way they're trying to convince us what they were doing, giving up this land or taking the land was a good thing for us, even though we have had no input in that decision. And the laws of Antigua and Barbuda, different laws say that there should be input from the general public, from our Planning Act to the Escazú Agreement, which we signed up to in 2018. So what the Barbudan people want is generally the practice is do it to them first, and then they'll fall in line afterwards, according to the government. So we're still fighting that. And then environmentally, a similar thing was done with another investor, and their development is more on the coast, and the coast has been damaged in the sense that there is no more gradual sand going into the sea. Now it's just a drop, like a cliff. It's being washed away because they use geobags. And then as a result of that as well, the construction of the airport, I believe, has altered the way the water runs on the land. So when it rains, there's a lot more flooding, and some roads are impassable. So this so-called development is having a negative environmental effect in Barbuda. And we're experiencing some restrictions with regards to our access to the beaches as well, where people go and celebrate or camp out. So little by little, it appears that the government here are giving away our land that we've always lived on and lived with in order to survive on Barbuda.
The struggle continues.
Mario, can you tell us a little bit about what is happening in Puerto Rico and the Caño area? Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Hello, everyone. I am Mario Núñez Mercado, director of the Caño Núñez Land Trust. And I always say that it is crucial to look back in history, since our first settlers, the Taino indigenous peoples, then to the colonization process that ended in 1898. Puerto Rico was under the Spanish government in a colonial relationship. That relationship in 1898 just switched from one player to another because the colonial relationship was upheld. And now we depend on the United States of America. So we have been a colonial land for over 500 years. This hasn't allowed our island to evolve and to move toward independence, which is so necessary for our people. We are undermined by our general government policies and by the policies of the Puerto Rican government. As Lena pointed out, Puerto Rico suffered the effects of Hurricane Maria, which devastated the island of Puerto Rico. Most people were left without electricity, without water for over 6 months. And right now, we still have problems in our waterways. We currently have over 150,000 people who are not getting drinking water as a result of lack of maintenance and the effects of the hurricane and the fact that we depend on the government of the United States. So community organizations in the Caño Martín Peña area has been crucial. We've been able to recover thousands of structures. Out of 8,000 structures affected in the Caño Martín Peña area, that was a high percentage. Of over 15% of our residents were able to recover their homes. Many families had to abandon the district after the hurricane, had to move out of Puerto Rico into the United States, and that those families weren't able to recover up until a few years ago when they were able to come back to the district. As for our government, as most governments, like Jackie pointed out, the government is not our ally. Quite the contrary, they try to promote the displacement of communities here. We are aware of Donald Trump's policies. He does not recognize the effects of climate change. He does not recognize vulnerabilities. But having a community, an active community organization, has allowed our people to move and to seek out solutions in order to cut those ties that we have. On June 1st, we entered the hurricane season. As you know, we are in the Caribbean. We are neighbors of Barbuda in the sense that we are all part of the Caribbean. And Because of that, our community started mobilizing and started implementing an emergency management plan for the hurricane season. This season impacts all of us every year, whether it is through rain, winds, or a hurricane in and of itself. So having community organizations that are active allows us to seek solutions that break those ties, that dependence on our government, since our government doesn't always necessarily want to help us. We had to wait 30 days after the hurricane for the municipal government to work with the communities. This response was too slow. I think that the effect of the hurricane was so huge that the government was not prepared to handle such a situation, right? So looking at it from that perspective, I think that this is a crucial time for our communities to stay active, and that is the key message. The state, the government, wants to promote individualism. Collective land tenure is not well seen, is frowned upon by the government, unlike by the community residents who do favor community tenure. As I mentioned, after the hurricanes, the government took advantage of what happened. And here we are seeing the same thing. There's a project called Esencia in Cabo Rojo. It is a $1 billion project with foreign capitals interested in investing and keeping our beaches, keeping our lands that had been originally preserved by our communities are being left unprotected. The local government of Puerto Rico is now promoting a new code for planning and permitting, which is eliminating all of the protections on the lands. They are eliminating those protections so that international investors can own our lands. They have a policy of privatization, of selling our resources. And in that sense, Caño, Martín Peña, and our land trust can be manipulated by our government if they want to steal our lands. We are located in a privileged area near the financial district, near universities, near commercial areas, near avenues with a lot of traffic, with a lot of collective transportation. We have an urban train system that allows for our mobility. We know how privileged the communities of Caño Martín Peña are in terms of where they are located. And that also leaves them vulnerable to policies seeking to eliminate those communities, to eliminate those networks. The residents of Caño Martín Peña decided a few years ago to come up with this community land trust. That was a way to serve the families who were underserved in our district. We have around 8,000 households, out of which 52% currently have individual deeds and 48% have collective tenure deeds on the land. Not all of them have a surface deed, but the fact that they are part of the land trust means that they have a right to have that deed. As Lena said, the land is owned by the district. It is collectively owned. So that means we are all owners of the land. And the families who have homes there have a right to get a deed to that home in order to sell that home and move around or get a mortgage on it without losing benefits. When a family decides to sell a home, 25% of the value of that is added to the valuation process so that those families are not harmed and they can have a surface right deed. Something that's important about our land trust is the fact that we were internationally recognized by the World Habitat Award received in Ecuador in 2016. After that award, that recognition, our government started changing its narrative, started recognizing us. At first, they wanted to attack us. They wanted to promote policies to grab our lands and give those back to investors and agencies. A law was passed in 2009 to do that, but after the award, we were recognized and that changed. In 2013, we promoted a bill, Bill 114 from May 13 of 2013, which gave the land back to the communities. The communities were able to operate the land trust from that moment on, and that is when we began granting our surface deeds. And that process was hard because when the lands were transferred, not all of the land was recognized for the land trust. So we had to do interventions. We had to visit the residents in order to identify the families who had an individual deed and help them obtain their surface deed. We have already granted 178 surface deeds with over 250 members, and we aspire to keep growing so that our land trust can exist in perpetuity. This means that we can work with other agencies. We needed a government agency to work with us to coordinate all government efforts in order to channel the waterway that is around our communities. And we had to coordinate with the federal governments, with the governments of San Juan, where the district is located. And so we obtained the land trust, which is a tool. I call it a tool, but it is a private entity with an independent legal person, and it was created independently. We also have several communities within the area that work as voluntaries. I have been a community leader since 1998. I was part of the creation of the different entities. I'm not an expert, but I am somebody who defends, who upholds our communities as a resident of Caño, Martín, Peña. The state policies go against our most vulnerable communities. We see policies to privatize lands, to privatize beaches, and that is what we are fighting against. That is what we are standing up against in order to uphold our country's resources and fight the policies to sell and privatize our resources under our government.
Okay, thank you so much, Mario. Muchísimas gracias. I am going to move on to the second question, and I think we're going to keep it very brief now. But the second question is more related to the importance of having communal land ownership, communal land tenure, and strong community organization in helping your communities face climate change. What was the importance of your land system, you would say, in facing climate-related challenges? Jackie, maybe we can start with you.
Our communal land system is, and it has been in the past, what has helped us to survive. Originally, the Barbudans, as an island, when slavery was finished, nobody really bothered with the Barbudans. They weren't seen as a threat. The fact that they had the land was ignored. And it wasn't till later on that we were forced into like a marriage, a partnership with Antigua. And that became formalized in 1981 when Antigua and Barbuda reluctantly became independent of the UK because we are a Commonwealth colony, so to speak. And in terms of our climate, the issues of climate and the way things happen on the island, every decision that impacts the island is taken to the community first in a village meeting. So, say, for instance, historically, there was a development that came to the island, and the people had a village meeting about it, and they did not want it, but other bodies, including the government, were trying to force it on the people. So Barbudans being Barbudans, they gathered together, they went to the site of the development, and there were containers up there that contained resources to help build the development, and they pushed the containers over the cliff, off the cliff, to show that they were not going to have that development where they were having it, and that they will be listened to. And because there were concerns of what that development would do to the nature of the area that they were going to develop. What I see is people often come to Barbuda, recognize its beauty, recognize there's lots of green, and the first few things that come to mind is, oh, how can I get some of that? And why aren't they doing more with it? And what they don't understand is the island as it stands has supported financially and through what people can grow. It has supported people in living and raising their families, sending people off to school to train in other countries. And we do it in a way that is sympathetic to the island. We don't take more than we need. Yet when developers come and they extract, they're not extracting because it needs to be extracted. They're extracting to see how much money they can make from it. So it's only them that benefits. The way that Barbudans live, the whole island benefits, and the environment is not endangered or harmed in any way. Barbudans know which lobsters to take out of the lagoon and which ones to put back. They know what size crabs to take out of the crab holes and which ones to put back. So we live with the land. We don't abuse it. And this relationship with the land has enabled us to live harmoniously. When it was Hurricane Irma, I was here and it was my first ever hurricane. That was a Category 5. But what saved us that night was the wetlands that we had. And that was the Ramsar site, level 2. And it helped to hold back the water and cut down the wind so it didn't get all the way into the village. That Ramsar site has been decimated now by development, multi-million-dollar houses being built in an enclave, a gated community, so that there's no access for the fishermen and people who go down there swimming to get to the water side, because it's kept secret, but surfers come to that point of the island because it has an amazing area for surfing at certain times of the year. The surfers come, they use it and they go, but the developers have actually put up guard posts, put up 10-foot high fences, and you can no longer access that part of the island. So we understand how to look after the island. We understand how to use it without using it up, so to speak. And we understand that we get the best out of it if we share it and work with it. That's the way forward for everybody, not just Barbuda, but for everybody, because the world is getting smaller and eventually there'll be nothing left. So if you work with what you have, especially nature, then you'll be fine.
Thank you, Jackie. That's really powerful. Thank you.
Mario, the same question goes for you. Why do you think collective land tenure has helped you face climate change? Well, as I pointed out, our communities are surrounded by a waterway, a channel, or a caño connecting the San Juan Bay to the sea on the west and to the Torrecillas Lake on the east. So we, of course, are affected by climate change as well. We recognize the increased sea level. And we have been affected by that for decades because of our infrastructure. We have been affected by flood. Our communities have lost their belongings. And as climate change increases and as the sea level increases, we are becoming more vulnerable. The communities are always going to be affected by floods. What's important in our planning for climate change, I think we need to recognize the knowledge of the residents. We need to recognize the fact that the residents are the ones who know the land best because they are facing the effects of climate change every day. And based on their knowledge, we need to bring new solutions and alternatives that are based on that knowledge, right? Because those are the people who know how to face the effects of climate change on a day-to-day basis and how important it is to preserve resources, like Jackie was saying. The communities know how to use the resources. We have manglers. We know how to use those in order to prevent the sea level increase from flooding the communities. I think that having a community land trust lightens the burden for each individual resident, right? It creates an institution that becomes an ally for the citizens as a community and that learns from their knowledge. In our case, specifically, Leilani has visited us and Lena has visited us as well. And you know that our Caño area had or was occupied by people. We had to relocate those families. So the land trust allowed us to ensure accessible homes for those people who were displaced and had to come back. We recognized how important it was to recover the waterway and to restore it. So what we did was become part of the participatory processes in order to go to the government, in order to claim what we needed to claim, in order to demand that they respect the waterways, that they respect the resources, and that they give it back to us and to our communities. As I said in the beginning, we know that the government of the United States does not recognize the greenhouse gas emissions, does not recognize the effects of climate change. After Hurricane Maria, Donald Trump visited Puerto Rico as if the population needed that. They handed them rolls of toilet paper when they didn't have water, they didn't have food, right? And many governments stand behind that, but our people doesn't. That's what we're talking about. That is the fight that we need to continue on. If we become organized, we will have power. If not, then the power will belong to the government and will go against us as citizens. So it's important to have a community organization that is solid, that is participatory, that is active, that is not just working in theory, but that it is actually taking upon itself to fight for their citizens and for their district. Excellent. Thank you so much, Mario.
I think we can move on to the discussion with the audience now. I think there may be some questions. I know that Liz asked a question in the Q&A box, which maybe we can start with. Shall we do that? Great. So Jackie, this question is for you from Liz Alden-Wiley, a well-respected communal land tenure expert, who I also know very well. Liz, nice to see you. Jackie, how is the community post-election now actively demanding community land title over the island? Can you say something about that? Is there a plan in hand for such a campaign? I'm happy that court cases, Liz says, are going well, if slowly, but popular organization seems key. What help can outside organizations and persons long working on communal land titles help?
Hi, Liz. Thank you for the question. Since the election, there has been an increased focus on the lands of Barbuda. So obviously Barbudans are concerned, that the government are going to come and be bullies and take the land. But what we are doing as the council, the governing body, and the Barbudans, is we are continuing to survey the land and issue a right to occupy certificates once a piece of land has been identified for a member of the community, and have to keep in mind that the community are actually identified and permitted to have 3 individual pieces, but for different purposes. So one can be to build your house on, one can be for a business venture that you have, whether it's raising sheep, an orchard, or Airbnb, and then one can be for agriculture and farming. So there are different reasons to have the land. So we're continuing with that. But we've also found that there's been an increase, and I think it's a worry and frustration from Barbudans who are abroad wanting to have their certificates as well. So we're trying to get the balance right in terms of meeting everybody's need. But we also have to be aware that the council itself is responsible to a certain extent to the people that live on the island. So we have to designate certain areas of land to be where we will put housing, and where we will put the farms, and where we will enable businesses, maybe noisy businesses like bars and things like that. So maybe more zoning. And so that is a challenge, but we've also found that we can get support for these challenges with other organizations that are in a similar situation to us. So there's one organization within the Caribbean, it's called the Stronger Caribbean Together, and that's different islands that amazingly are going through exactly the same challenges that we are with the government. The only difference being our land situation, where the land is communal, but at the same time, different governments are working with different companies, other countries like the Chinese. They're all over, and they seem to offer help with housing and help with other things in terms of a grant, so you don't on the surface look like you have to pay them back, but I don't believe you get something for nothing. There will be some deal or something going on somewhere. So we find that working together, we can compare notes with other islands and find problems, but also find solutions. And we also find that working with international organizations, especially if they're legal ones, are very, very helpful. And we have also worked with the United Nations to an extent as well. And so the international legal people do have a challenge because, again, for them funding can be an issue. But we, personally, we found them very, very helpful in the court cases that we have because they have the expertise that we need to help us to fight and in some cases to win as well. So when we challenged the airport that was being built on Barbuda, when it was Hurricane Irma, it was awful and everybody was scared. And we were told that a second hurricane was coming, Hurricane Louise. Louise never appeared, but they still took us off of the island and we were held in Antigua. They said it was a state of emergency, but it wasn't. We were held in Antigua whilst developers were allowed to come on the island and ultimately built an airport while we started to build an airport, and they completed it and opened it last year. And we are, two of us are challenging that, and it's through the help of international bodies and the legal team that has enabled us to make that challenge. And it's been about 8 years, and I think we're going to get a final judgment on Thursday. So hope, fingers crossed, things will go in our favour. But the local support and the international support are very, very important in terms of giving hope and actually being able to make substantial challenges to what's being done to you and your island.
Thank you so much, Jackie. We have one more question in the Q&A. I love this question. It's about youth engagement in this movement. It's from Genevieve Druin. And Genevieve says, thank you so much for your words of knowledge. I wanted to know if there are any youth bodies that engage with these works. If not, how can we encourage more interest within the younger generation? Joy Gold, Good Luck, Rooftops Canada, Summer Student Researcher.
In the case of Caño Martín Peña, we have a community base made up of 2 organizations. One of those organizations is the group of Young Leaders in Action. That is its name. And they are the intergenerational bridge. They have been participating in decision-making processes. We have many young people who are part of community boards who are mostly headed by adults. We do recognize there is a culture where adults are mainly the ones making decisions. But in the case of Martín Peña, we have young people because our children have a voice and have a vote because we are planning for the future. We are not necessarily going to see that future. They are the ones who are going to see that future. So they're very important for our community from early in the process, that they can be part and they can participate in the boards so that they can develop that sense of belonging, so that they can feel identified, so that they can relate to the different projects created from the community and for the community. To us, children and young people are key, are valuable, are as valuable as the adult. Of course, the adults have their experience, they have the knowledge that they bring to the table. But when we plan for the future, we have to take those children, those young people into account because they are the ones who are going to continue the process. That is why we talk about intergenerational transition, so that we don't have to wait for them to become adults in order for them to participate and make decisions.
Hi, in Barbuda, it's slightly different because the young people grow up understanding that the island belongs to them. And as much as that sounds weighty, they know that it belongs to them. So when they hear about members of their family who've traveled abroad and have to pay for the land and then pay for the house on top of that, they understand. So what they do is, once they know they have a piece of land, we don't take loans from banks. We will save for so many months and then you build the foundation. Save for a bit more, then you take the walls up to the ring beam. Save for a bit more, then you put the roof on. So it's a very, very gradual, and it all belongs to you, and there's no debt around your neck afterwards. Because if I was still in the UK, I'm 65 this year, and I would only just now be coming to the end of paying my mortgage off. Whereas the youngsters here, it amazes me how many people own the land and the house, and they're not yet 40, or they're only just 40, and they have one, maybe two properties, and they make funds and money from renting them. So the young people here are aware. In terms of youth organisations, if we find out, or when we find out about them, it's through the support mechanisms on the other islands that we link with, in terms of helping us with our struggles, and we help them as best we can with with their struggles as well. So information is shared. I've been to other civil society organisations where they talk about what their youth do or what they do with their youth, and that provides some level of inspiration in terms of what we can do. And what's really important is information sharing, so that people, the community, have access to the information that we have, and then they also have access to us as counsellors and or activists. So communication is important, and Barbuda is still a very oral society in an African kind of way, and we're learning to become more of a society where you write things down, because ultimately that's what's been important in the court cases that we've had, is what you say being recorded, and then it being used for or against you in court.
Yes, if you'll allow me, I wanted to make a comment following up on what Jackie said. We obviously recognize that the communities of Caño, Martín, Peña were spontaneous settlements that began at the beginning of last century, when people migrated from the rural areas to the city, and that transition towards an industrialized economy. Those people left their lands in the rural areas in order to come to this area and seek a future, right? When they came here, they found the demand for homes that we see nowadays. Many of those communities were the result of mutual help, where solidarity was key. Some were able to build with wood, some were able to build with cement, right? And they helped each other. That is why solidarity was so key. Our settlement was built as a result of solidarity, of help, mutual help between families. Thanks to that, many of our families don't have a debt. They're not indebted to the state or to any banks. As Jackie was saying, in Caño, Martín, Peña, for instance, my parents bought a wooden house, which is now a cement house. But as they were able to save up a little bit more money, they would build a room, build an additional wall, build a roof, right? And little by little, very gradually, they were able to build their home. That is why I agree with Jackie. It is so important for the residents to be familiar with the history of the settlement. That is why we like recognizing the history of a settlement, the history of that community. We like promoting, right, that knowledge amongst our people, because that creates a link that links them to the place that they inhabit.
Thank you, Mario. Yeah, really important. We see this overlap between both places with this idea of debt when Jackie was talking about how youth are owning homes and don't have that debt hanging over their head. I feel like that's such another important aspect of this financialization. Leilani had a question for both Mario and Jackie around the use of law and litigation. How important is that in your cases? Are you fearful that legal initiatives maybe don't go in your favor and make things worse, or have they been really helpful for your particular movement?
I found working with the legal representation that we have access to very helpful. It doesn't stop you being anxious. There's still a level of anxiety there, but the mindset that I've adopted is, if I don't fight, then what? That I could be put off. So you have to make your mind up that no matter what you're going to fight. Take the airport case, for instance. They started the airport when we were not on island. We were being held in Antigua. We couldn't come home. Then when they did stop did let us come home, you could only come for 4 hours. You had to go to the boat, give your name. You were allowed on the boat. You came over. You got 4 hours. You had to pass somebody on the boat who had a gun, a soldier. So what's that for? I said, to come and get you if you don't come back off the island and go back to Antigua. I think, but Antigua's not home. We want to stay here and be able to tidy our houses, put out the things that are damaged and start clearing up. So you have to be prepared to do what's necessary within the law. And it really helps if you're able to find someone who's willing to fight for you, pro bono, preferably, and they understand. So our legal team, the person we spoke to initially, he does understand because he is of Caribbean descent, but even though he works in London, so he has a good level of understanding, and he's helped us with other issues as well. And we were so prepared to fight that we went all the way to the Privy Council in England because they kept knocking us back and saying that we had no real interest. We were just being busybodies. There was no real interest in fighting. That's what they tried to say to us. We ended up at the